Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and welcome to month 2 of the Charm Institute of Style. So this month I'm very excited because last month we established a designer that we wanted to explore, Ann Lowe. And this month I really wanted to dive into more of a concept, right? Because everything that we're exploring this year, it's not just about designer clothing, it's about movements in design and in fashion history. So I think one of the most formative movements in the 20th century was caused by World War II in the 40s. You had clothing rationing, you had women going back into the workforce, and I was really inspired by especially British initiatives to ration, sustain, save fabric, save materials. They published a book called Make, Do, and Mend, so talking about how to really conserve your clothes and make them last longer. And they also, you may have seen the show Land Girls, that was, based on the Women's Land Army in the UK. And the land girls took over farming while men were away at war, and they wore these really cute little overalls. So I was very inspired by the workwear of World War II that women wore as they sort of stepped up into the workforce. So I think a lot of these ideas are very, very relevant to today, right? We have so much fast fashion, so much rampant overconsumption. And this month I would just challenge you to think about even small things like, can you sew just from your stash this month? And that's something that we did in the studio too. We had a bunch of linen, we had a bunch of prints for little blouses, and we made a concerted effort not to buy new fabric this month. I also want to look at ways to make your clothing last longer. And part of that can just be taking it slow, right? Really put the effort into what you're sewing rather than trying to get it done quickly. Make sure it's something that you're going to be really proud of and want to wear for a long time and that's going to last a long time. So what is more workwear and World War II to me than a pair of overalls? So I love wearing overalls, and one thing that I've never really loved about them is that they have to be really loose to be comfortable, and if they're tight, they're uncomfortable. So I found a solution to that, which is elastic shirring on the back panel, which kind of snatches it to your waist, but also makes this really comfortable to wear. So I'm really excited about these overalls. I think they're both functional, cute, and comfortable. So this month we're going to be diving into all of these concepts of make, do, and mend, sustainability, and making our clothes last longer. So without further ado, let's get right into the pattern pieces. Okay, so as always, we are going to look at all of our pattern pieces minimized and laid out together on the table, and I'll talk you through all of them so that you understand how this pattern goes together. So we have more pattern pieces than usual this month, and that's probably because there's lots of pocket options. There is, you've got your button, placket, and facings on the left side opening. So let me just talk you through all of them. It's actually not that confusing once you understand how they go together. So you'll probably recognize what this looks like. It's a very bodicey looking overall front. So we have a bust start and a curved waist start. It's cut on the fold. The bodice is lined, so you're going to cut one of your fabric, one of your lining. And these marks here, these circles, are for your pocket placement, okay? This pocket is optional, but it's a cute little tiny chest pocket right there. And then, as you can see, the neckline is slightly curved down. Very important, I'm gonna say this later, but I'll say it now. It's very important to stabilize this well so it doesn't stretch out and gape. Okay, and let's look at the back bodice pieces next. Your side back bodice, so you're gonna cut 2 fabric, 2 of your lining. And then your center back bodice, this is the shirred panel, okay? So this is cut on the fold and you only need to cut 1 from your fabric. And this will be shirred with elastic thread. Now let's look at our pant pieces. We have our pant front. You have pocket markings here. This is your hip pocket, 1 on each side. It has notches to match. You have marks for your buttonholes on the front and on the bodice front. The buttonholes go on the left side front. The right side just gets sewn as normal, okay? And then your pant back also has a pocket option. I love a back pocket personally. So you have a back pocket with circles to match here. And one important thing to know about this back pant is that you can tell how it matches the back bodice here. This notch matches that circle, and those pieces are going to match one to one. Now you may be thinking, why is the pant so much as large as the shirred panel? And that is because you're going to be actually shirring this seam in a way. You'll be sewing this seam with elastic thread so that you still have movement in the pant as well. One of my pet peeves in vintage clothes is when you have a shirred bodice, but then the waistline is rigid. So you can move your torso, but the waist is still really tight. So I wanted to make sure that the waist still felt comfortable to wear. So that's why this waist measurement, when unshirred, is going to be bigger than you would expect, okay? So let's see what else we have here. We have straps, okay? You're gonna cut 4 of your straps. The angled side matches the front here, and then they cross in the back buttonholes. So we'll have you do a couple buttonholes in case you need to adjust these. The button goes inside the bodice side back, all right? And then let's talk about these finishing pieces. So you have a pant left hip facing that finishes this edge here and also gives it stability because the buttonholes go there on the front. And finally, we have, what is this called? Button placket. This is called a button placket. So this goes all the way down on the back left side. This is what it gets folded in half lengthwise. These are your button markings. So the buttons are going to get sewn to the placket itself. One important thing to note is that once you have the pocket placed here, the placket is going to go all the way to the bottom. And instead of having to do buttonholes through the pocket, which would be a little awkward, we're having you do the bottom 2 as big snaps, okay? And that way you'll get a nice smooth line on the pocket and not have to create a buttonhole that goes through your pocket, because that just seemed really awkward to us. Okay, so those are all your pattern pieces. As always, if you're confused about how many to cut, check the instructions. It says everything in there. But a lot of pieces, but you'll start to understand as we put this together. So let's talk about fabric and supplies. Okay, so let's look at your fabric and supplies. So with your fabric, you're looking for a light to medium weight woven. And I think the most important thing to think about with your fabric weight is, is it light enough that you'll be able to shirr it? Because the heavier or more structured a fabric is, the harder it is to shirr. And some heavy fabrics won't take to shirring at all because the fabric is it's more structured than the elastic thread is, right? So if you're not sure, you can always do a test with your elastic thread on a scrap of fabric and see how it shirrs. Okay, so with that in mind, and also thinking about, historical photographs of overalls that I saw from the 40s, they don't look like heavy denim. They tend to look drapey and more like a chambray, or maybe it's just because they were so worn at that point. But I really wanted to replicate that drapey feel. So we used a lot of linen and cotton blends for ours, and that Kaufman Essex linen is really great for this. So you can see it has some drape to it, but also has the look of a chambray, and this comes in a million colors. Okay, so that would be one option. There's also silk matka. Oh, this is doubled up. Oops, I was like, why is that so thick? Okay, there's silk matka. So this is also sometimes called silk linen. You can see it has a similar weave as linen, a little bit of slubbing, but it's made out of silk. So we're doing a jumper version in this fabric for something a little bit dressier, like a pinafore dress. So on the 15th, you'll get the skirt expansion. You'll be able to make a pinafore dress. So that's an option for something maybe a little bit dressier. And then for things that are maybe a little bit easier to sew, this is a linen and rayon blend. So similar to the linen and cotton blend. But if you're someone who's just kind of getting started and you really want to stick to an easy to sew fabric like cotton, this poplin would be great. It's light enough to shirr well. It will also give you just a little bit of drape and but enough structure to you know, stand up to all the darts and structuring on the bodice. Okay, so you will need lining. This is an acetate lining fabric, but you may want to use like a cotton or something like that for this type of garment, something that's easy to throw in the wash. Finally, you will need a little bit of interfacing for your button placket and for your hip facing. So with something like the linen, I would pair probably like a tricot fusible interfacing. For a more structured fabric, you could also do a woven interfacing, but you need a little bit of fusible interfacing. And then you'll also want to stabilize your buttonholes on the overall fronts. So this is always handy, these 1¼ inch wide strips of fusible interfacing, but of course you can also just cut strips from your yardage for that. You will need, let's see, elastic. 1/4 inch elastic goes at the top of the shirred panel. So this is a casing. And then the rest of it is shirred with elastic thread. So this comes in a few different colors. And one thing, I know a lot of people have given us feedback that their machines may not work so well with elastic threads, especially if you have a newer computerized machine. It works really well in mechanical machines and the older vintage machines. But if you have trouble with elastic shirring for whatever reason, one thing you could do is do elastic casings all the way down and just use 1/4 inch elastic. So that's one more option. You would need to line that panel probably though, so that you could make channels for the elastic to go in. But that's just an idea if you are wary of elastic shirring for whatever reason. You will also need your regular all-purpose poly thread to match your fabric. Microtex needles are my favorite, and 80/12 will probably match whatever weight of fabric you're using here. You'll need 5 3/4 inch buttons for the side of your overalls. And then at the bottom, you'll need 2 large snaps, right? So that's underneath the buttons where the pocket is. So that is how the bottom of the placket will be closed. Okay, so those are all your supplies, and now we're ready to get started sewing. Okay, so we are ready to sew. I wanted to show you what I've got going on here. I decided I wanted to do an upcycling project given the theme of sustainability and making do with less. And so I did a little thrifting. There were a lot of articles in the 40s about how to turn something like your husband's suit into a dress. And so I ended up finding a few pairs of jeans and a shirt with this little chambray shirt with pineapples. Jeans in this light wash, and then a pair of jeans in this tropical fabric for like accents. So I'm gonna be making a pair of short overalls because I really wanna see these in shorts. And so the fabric is gonna look a little different here because I disassembled these jeans. You can see there's some, you know, dark spots here. So this is all, there's some weird seams here. This is all part of the fun of this project and getting into the theme this month. So this is my overalls front, and this is my partially assembled lining. So that'll be in the pineapples. So let's focus first on the bodice front. We're going to be doing stay stitching around the neckline. So we're going to be starting at one underarm, pivoting at the circle, going to center front, and then we'll do the same thing from the other side, overlapping at center front. Okay, so starting at the underarm and using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Better turn my machine on. And your regular stitch length, so 2.5. Back stitch. I'm going to pivot at that circle. going to go just slightly past center front, back stitch. And now I'm going to flip it over so I can go from the opposite underarm and repeat. And now I'll just overlap my stitching at center front and back stitch again. And stitching directionally like that helps keep everything out on grain and from becoming distorted. Okay, so there's stay stitching on our bodice front. And then you'll need to do the same thing on your bodice side backs, which look like this. So you're going to want to stitch from the higher point here to the lower point on both pieces. Okay, so that's from this will be the side seam to the sort of back princess seam, and it'll meet with the shirred panel here. Okay, so now we're going to sew darts on our bodice front. And any step you do here on your bodice, you're going to also repeat on your bodice lining. So we have two types of darts here. We have a sort of your standard bust dart right here. It's just a triangle. And here we have a cutout curved waist dart. So on this one, you don't need to mark the seam allowance until you get about up here, and then you'll need that sort of triangle at the top so you can know you're going to use the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance down here, and then you'll follow your stitching line when you get to the point. Okay, so let's start with our bust darts. We're going to put them right sides together. So I did take some videos of our thrifting adventure. Andrea and I went thrifting for these pants to reuse. And these were the ugliest pants I have ever seen. I don't feel bad about taking them apart. Oh, hi, buddy. So I don't know if you guys can hear, but we have, and if you haven't seen on social media, we have a guest in the annex, and his name is Buddy. And he's a fabulous cat who moved onto my porch and was freezing and hurt and just in not good shape. Buddy, what are you doing? And so I brought him into the annex and took him to the doctor, and he's been spayed and taken care of, and now he's quarantining in here for a while until I can get him snap tested again. But he's so sweet. Okay, so now we're gonna sew this bust dart just regular like this, okay? Okay, so I back stitched at the beginning, the legs, and now I'm just going to gradually sew off the point here, gradually being the key word. And then instead of back stitching, I'm going to tie these ends into a knot. And there we go. Okay, very appropriate. I'm going to use the cat ham here. Hi, buddy. So I'm going to press this down towards the waist. Get a little more steam going in this. There we go. Okay, so we should have a nice pressed, smooth look there. And now we'll do one of the waist darts together. So we're going to fold this in half, right sides together. I'm going to start by pinning at the point. Buddy, you're gonna have to learn to be quiet for the videos. I know. He needs so much attention and cuddles. He's so sweet. This is the meow of come hang out with me on the daybed and cuddle me. which I would really love to do, but we have to make a video, buddy. Okay, so at these raw edges, I just pinned together like this. I'm gonna be stitching at 5/8 of an inch, and then I have this red line to follow. So back stitching at the beginning, and I'm just using my machine to follow the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here. And now when I get to the marked line, I can follow this instead. And again, just like we did with the bust start, just very, very gradually sew off the edge of the fabric. Okay, so this is what this will look like. And what you're going to want to do is slash this up to the point. So put a pair of scissors and just slash it as far as possible, but not too far. And now we're going to press this open. And now really take your time with the point of this dart, because otherwise it can look a little nipply. It has a very vintage look. It goes up further than a modern dart. But of course you don't want it to be too puckery. So spend time pressing from the inside and the right side. Use a press cloth if your fabric gets shiny spots at all. But you want a really smooth point like that. Okay, so there's a bust start, there's a waist start. I'm gonna finish the other two off camera, maybe give Buddy a little attention, and then we'll come back for the next step. Okay, so now we're ready to sew the bodice pocket. So you have two of these because it's self-lined. So we're going to put these right sides together. Now we need to leave an opening along one of these sides so that we can turn it right side out. I would suggest doing it maybe along one of these sides. You want to get a nice pivot point at the bottom, so I probably wouldn't do it on the bottom, though you could do it on one of these short edges here. But instead, I'm going to do it on one of these vertical sides. So I'll start here, go around, finish here. And we have 3 pivot points, 2 in the upper corners and 1 at this lower kind of chevron shaped point. Well, actually, I guess we have 5 pivot points because we need to pivot at these corners too. Okay, so there's our lower point. Pivot again. We'll do one more stitch here. Pivot at the upper corner. And then our final pivot point, the upper right corner. And now I'm going to backstitch. Okay, so now we can trim away the corners. And then you'll trim seam allowances. So you can trim them as one or you can grade, totally up to you. It kind of depends on the thickness of your fabric. This is a little thicker, so I'm going to grade these seam allowances. And I wouldn't trim too close at the opening. Buddy has finally decided to be quiet. Between scenes, he lost his mind. He was up here rolling around. Then he got on the sewing machine table and was trying to get me to pet his head, but almost getting sewn over in the process. And I think he's settled down for a nice little rest on the nap, or on the rug. A nap on the rug. So hopefully, fingers crossed, he's gonna take it easy so we can get this video done, so everyone can learn how to sew overalls. Okay, turn those corners out. This is a process. There we go. There we go. Okay, so now at the opening, you're just going to turn the seam allowances in. And now we will press it flat. Okay, so now if you like, this would be a good time to go ahead and do this process on your back pant pockets. Oh, I like this side better. So it's self-lined, so you can do whichever side you like, obviously. So you can go ahead and do this process on your pants if you like, pant pockets. I'm gonna go right into applying this to my bodice. So there are 2 circles here, and that's where my upper edges align, upper corners of the pocket. So you have those 2 upper corners. And I'm going to pin all the way around, except for the upper edge. Obviously, we don't want to sew the pocket shut. Okay, so I'm going to stitch around these sides, the 2 vertical sides and the lower edge. Now, if you like, you could do a bar tack or something fancy here, or one of those little triangle corners. I'm just going to go back and forth a few times so that we get this nice and secure workwear style. I'm a little terrified that these little short alls are going to look a little oshkosh bagosh, little toddler style because of the fabrics and because of the length of the pant, but you know what? It's an experiment. So I'm edge stitching, which means I'm very close to the fold, the edge of the pocket. A little less than 1/8 of an inch. Oops, that went a little too far. Okay, and again, in this upper corner, I'm going to just backstitch back and forth a few times. And there we go. Okay, so there's my adorable little flower pocket. These jeans were wild. These were like a pair of Old Navy skinny jeans, maybe from a few moons ago, but I loved that they were this tropical print. Okay, so there we go. Now we have our bodice pocket sewn on, and we will move on to the next step. Okay, so our next step is to sew our straps. Here's one that's completed already, flowers on one side, pineapples on the other. And we're gonna sew this one next. So you want to interface your outer strap, especially if your fabric has any stretch like these denims do. And then we're going to place that right sides together with our uninterfaced strap. And you can see on this pineapple chambray that there was a pocket here at one point, but this is going to be the lining for the strap, so that won't show. So we're going to pin along two vertical edges, two long edges, and the short unnotched edge. So this is the angled edge and that is notched. We are going to leave the angled side unpinned and we're going to pin the short straight side. The angled side is the one that gets attached to the bodice. This is the one that it goes towards your back and gets a buttonhole or a button. I can't remember. Buttonhole. Okay. All right, so now we are starting we're starting at the angled end and we're stitching one long end. And now we have two pivot points at the short end. And backstitch. So you can see we're leaving this angled end open. Okay, and just like we did on the pockets, you can trim across those corners. And now I'm going to grade the seam allowances. So the lining will be the narrower one. I'm trimming that down to about an 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so now the interface strap will trim to about 1/4 inch. Okay, so now, as you can probably imagine, we're going to turn this right side out. I didn't bring a tool with me to do this, so I might just do this off camera once I have the tool. But you can use a loop turner, fast turn tool. You could probably just do it with your fingers. It'll struggle for a while, which is what I'll probably end up doing right now. And then you're gonna press it flat like this one, okay, with the corners poked out like that. Oh, and that's your buttonhole mark right there. Okay, so then you'll have two finished straps. Okay, I wanted to show you how I have basted on my straps to my bodice front. So as you can see, I have basted them on 1/2 inch and then I've aligned them so that the notches are matching. The finished edge of your strap should be just meeting this circle right here, aligning with the circle. And when they're facing down like this, because you've pinned them and basted them right sides together, they're going to be going outward. But when you put them on, and they flip up like this, then they will be going inward like they're supposed to and cross in the back. Okay, so put this aside for now. Now you're gonna grab your lining front, which you've been assembling along the way, and your bodice front facing. All right, and this piece goes right here. Now we're going to turn in the edge, the longer edge, 5/8 of an inch on this facing. Just to get a nice neat finish. Like so. And now we can apply it here. Now you'll see in the instructions that it says to apply it to the right side of the left bodice opening as worn, okay? The lining as worn. So I always have to think through this. You know, I'll be looking at this and imagining how I'll hold it up to myself. The pineapples will be facing my body, right? And that's the right side. So that means that this is my left side as worn. So that's why the facing goes here. And we're going to pin all the way around. And I'm going to start on the folded under edge, and I'm going to edge stitch. And then when I pivot down here, I'm going to switch to basting. This is going to be visible. That's why it's an edge stitch. And this just needs to get caught in the seam allowance. Okay, so now I'm going to pivot, now that I've edge stitched. I'm going to switch my stitch length to 5 and my seam allowance to about 1/2 inch. And now I'm going to baste the remaining sides. And there we go. So this will provide a nice sturdy edge to put our buttonholes through. And it looks nice too, right? Okay, so here we have our casing at the top. I turned it in 1/4 inch and then 3/8 of an inch. Our elastic will get tunneled through there and it's edge stitched along there. So now we're ready to do our shirring, which is really exciting. The shirring you are going to do from the right side, and the rows need to be spaced apart 1/4 inch. So I'm going to start 1/4 inch from my edge stitching here. And instead of back stitching and then breaking your thread on each end, I like to do a sort of like, I call it like a serpentine pattern. So I'm going to like do these little sort of curvy snake-like U-turns in the seam allowances. Okay, so let's go to the machine. And for shirring, I like to have my stitch length really long. So I'm going to take it up to 4 or 5. And I'm using the edge of my foot to align with the edge stitching and back stitching. It's really hard to see this white thread on here. I thought it would pop, but it does not pop. You can see it's already starting to bunch up just a little bit. It's not going to be super dramatic yet. And actually on the last pair I made, it wasn't super dramatic until I steamed it. So fear not, don't worry. You can also do a test of this. Okay, so I'm in the seam allowance now. I'm going to do 2 stitches and then I'm going to pivot here. Let me just get that out of the way. Okay, so now I turn around. I'm using my last row of stitching as my guide, and we're going to continue like this. Okay, so I just filled in about just a little bit of a row there. I can do the same thing at the bottom here because that piece is curved. So just add a little extra here so that you don't have any unshirred bits on this panel. Okay, so now we're gonna work from the wrong side, and you want your iron to be nice and hot, and you want to make sure you have water for steam. And now we're gonna shrink this up. I'm just hovering over, I'm not pressing it flat. Let's see how it's now shrinking, curling in on itself. And it's doing what we want it to do. And then from the front, it'll look like that, nice and stretchy. So there's your elastic shirring. So in the next scene, we will be inserting the elastic into the upper edge here so that it's also gathered and elasticized. Okay, everyone, so now that we've done the shirring, we are ready to put the 1/4" elastic in that upper channel. And I usually do this with a safety pin, just attach a safety pin to the end and then kind of work it through the casing. Andrea always does it with a loop turner like this, like she feeds the loop turner through and then attaches it to the casing or the elastic and then pulls it through. So I was trying to challenge myself to do it a different way, and yeah, let's see how it goes. So I tunneled the loop turner through, and now I open the latch. I'm gonna pierce the elastic. Is that good? Yeah, I'm gonna close the latch. And now I'm gonna do this. Oh, okay, yeah. That's pretty good. So far, so good. I get stressed out anytime a loop turner is involved in anything. Oh, yeah, see, the latch opened. It caught a little, but now we got it. Okay, great, great. Look at us go. Okay, so I'm just gonna pull a little excess through. So, oh, geez, Louise. Violent. Okay. So, there's not like one particular length that would work for everyone, I think, though I think it says 7 inches in the instructions. I'm gonna pin one end just because of the violence through which I am pulling this through. But what I like to do, the way I think of it, is that you want to feed enough through so that it lays flat like the rest of the piece. Like it's not weird and bubbly on the casing. Like you have the same amount of elasticity and gathering of the fabric that you have in the shirring. So I'm feeling good about how this looks. I'm gonna cut off. I always like to leave a little excess here. You could stitch those in place in the seam allowances, or you can just pin it, because actually the next thing we're going to do is sew our center back panel to our, guys, I can't, the words are not there, to our back side bodice pieces. Yeah, we're on the next day. You don't know that because I'm wearing the same sweater, which I wore for continuity purposes, but I've actually like gone home. I ate dinner, I watched some stupid TV, I slept in a little, and now I'm trying to remember everything and the words aren't there. So in case you're wondering, why does she seem so much stupider than she did in the last scene, just know that I have had a little break and now I'm trying to catch up. Hi, buddy. All right, yeah, I hear you. So the important thing is that it matches at the bottom, and then at the top, you want there to be 5/8 of an inch above the finished edge of the elastic casing. There we go. Okay, buddy, are you gonna do that the whole time? All right, so now we're gonna stitch this, and you can pin the other one at the same time, but I'm just gonna show you one. Oh, and you should change back to your regular thread here. We will be using the elastic bobbin again, so just put that to the side. I actually didn't use that much, which is nice. Sometimes you run out of elastic bobbin right in the middle, and that is the worst. And then you have to thread another one or wind another one. All right, there we go. All right, now we're gonna stitch this. Regular stitch length, make sure to go back to 2.5 here. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Going to stitch to the top of the casing. So now that 1/4 inch elastic will be secured. You can go over it a couple times if you're nervous. So this is what it looks like. Remember, you have that 5/8 of an inch at the top. All right, the seam allowances will get pressed towards the side panel. So I'm going to repeat that with this other side, and then we'll be ready to sew the right side seam on the overalls. We are going to continue to leave the left side seam open. Okay, everyone, Buddy is here. He is helping a lot today. Buddy, you're gonna go on the floor. I brought Millie in to entertain him because he does like her. So why don't you go check out what Millie's doing. He's gonna be back. He's insatiable. He's insatiable for cuddles. All right, so I wanted to show you what I did here. We have the right side seam as worn, sewn top to bottom, pressed open, and then we have our back panel connected here. We're going to leave the left side seam open because that's where the button goes. Oh, hi, Buddy. There you go. So the lining, you remember we did this. Now your your right side seam as worn, so again, hold it up to you with the pineapples or the right side facing your body. The right side seam as worn will be sewn. Now, we don't have a shirred back panel on the lining, so because that panel is unlined. So what you're gonna have is one back side lining piece that is just going to remain solo for now, okay? So we're gonna put all these things, bodice pieces to the side, and we're gonna work on our pants. So you're gonna grab a pair of pants pockets and put them right sides together. And the first thing we're gonna sew is this curve. This is the pocket opening. All right, so I'm gonna pin this curve. And now we're going to stitch. So for now, that's the only stitching we're doing on this pocket. And now we're going to grade these seam allowances. And I'm just going to clip into this curve. Every half inch is good. And now we will understitch. Okay, so we're going to orient the seam allowances to whichever side is the lining. So be careful about this. When you're self-lining, it's easy to mix these sides up. And now I am just holding this open and I'm making sure that I'm stitching the seam allowances below. I'm stitching about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch away from that seam line. And now we will turn these so that they are wrong sides together. And we're going to press this understitched edge, just pushing the understitching out to the edge so that we get a nice clean finish. Okay, now we're going to stitch this lower curved edge. So do right sides together again. We're going to flip this back in. And now we're going to pin this entire curved edge. And now we will stitch this. So now we will grade these seam allowances just like we did for the upper opening. And then instead of clipping, we're going to be notching, because this pocket is a great example of an inner curve versus an outer curve. So let me finish grading and then we'll talk about that. Okay, so this would be an inner curve. This is an outer curve right next to each other. So anything that rounds out like this is going to be an outer curve, rounds in, inner curve. So outer curves need to be notched rather than clipped because they behave totally differently when you turn them right side out. So you need a different treatment for one versus the other. And if you're ever curious why, I recommend that you do a little test and reverse these and you'll totally see why, because one, the inner curve needs to be released so that the clips can open away from each other. An outer curve needs to have little bits of fabric removed because when you turn it right side out, there's too much fabric, so it gets ruffly. Okay, hopefully that's enough. All right, so now we will turn this right side out. There's a tiny little spot at the upper edge. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like, and now we are going to press it flat. And just take your time on this lower curve and like kind of use your fingers, because there's no understitching here. You have to be more careful and you have to kind of do the work yourself. All right, so you're going to do the same thing with the opposite pocket, so you'll have two mirrored pockets. Okay, Buddy and I are now here to demonstrate how you're going to attach your pocket to your pant front. Okay, oh my God, I just called Andrea because I was like, Andrea, you have to come pet this cat. So. Buddy obviously will be a house cat. He's not intended to be a working cat like this. I'm sorry, Buddy, but it's true. Okay, so here is your notch. You're going to match that on the side seam. And at your tiny upper edge, the inner curve here, the finished inner curve, will align with the notch at the waistline. Okay, so I'm going to pin that right there. I don't know how Buddy came to be quite as socialized as he is. He clearly loves people. But he was just a stray. I thought he was feral. Obviously, he's not feral. Yeah, he started showing up at my back door for food, and so I was feeding him, and then he decided to move onto my front porch, and I got him a little house. He wouldn't move into the house. He just stayed on this little wicker love seat that I have in the front. And the weather is not nice here in New York this time of year, so finally I just brought him in. And turns out he is the cuddliest cat I've ever met. And I did have him scanned, okay? He's not someone else's cat, though it would be tempting to steal him. But no, he has no chip, he was unneutered, he was badly injured. Anyway, the saga of Buddy. So now we're gonna edge stitch along this lower edge, and then we'll baste here and the side seam. Now, if you like, you can switch to an edge stitch foot here, because this, you know, some areas with edge stitching are very visible, like this one. So you might want to just do a little extra work to make sure that your stitching is even, rather than eyeball, which is what I normally do. Okay, now at the upper edge, I'm going to pivot. You can change to a long stitch length, and I'm just going to baste at about 1/2 inch. Just to hold all these layers together as one. So there's one pocket sewn on. You will repeat for the other side now. Okay, everyone, Andrea's here distracting Buddy, so he's not in this scene. I wanted to show you that I went ahead and sewed the back patch pockets. These are sewn just like the bodice patch pocket, okay? So I went ahead and did that, and then I edge stitched it on, aligning the upper edges of the pockets with those 2 circles there. Okay, so now we can put this to the side, get out your left pant front. Okay, so left as worn, and get out your pant front facing. All right, so now we're going to put these right sides together. This is interfaced. You can see there are notches to align. And one thing, you may want to serge this, okay? I'm just going to do it afterwards, but just keep that in mind that this edge will need to be finished of the facing. I'm going to pin these right sides together. Okay, so we're going to sew this from the upper edge down to this circle here. So don't go beyond that right now. So stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And I'm going to end my stitching at that circle and the notch. All right, so you can clip to that circle, and we will grade these seam allowances. So let's see. The facing will be the shortest one. I think I need my big scissors for this. There's a lot of seam allowances here because of the pocket. So you might have to do a few different lengths where the pocket is. And you can also hold your scissors at an angle to help get a nice beveled edge there. And then the longest one will be the pant itself. Okay, now we will understitch this facing. So we are going to open it out like this, and we're going to be understitching on the facing with the seam allowances underneath. Okay, so I'm just stitching just a smidge to the right. Bottom of the pocket, and then break your stitching. All right, so now you can flip the facing to the wrong side and press. And now I'm just going to baste this upper edge in place at the waistline. Okay, so I'll do that off camera, but just right here, just to hold those layers in place, and you can leave this free down here. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sew your right pant leg only, okay? So this right out seam, you can sew that and the inseam, but don't sew the left side seam. That needs to stay open. Okay, so I'm going to do the inseam on the left pant leg. So I'm going to put the pant front and pant back right sides together at the inseam only, so this inner curved edge. And again, because of the upcycled nature of my project, there's a seam here that will not be on yours, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so we're just going to sew this little seam right here. We can press this open. And remember, you're going to keep this left side seam open. Now what we're going to do is this crotch curve. So you're going to put the pants right sides together. I like to match the inseam seam line first. And we're going to be able to sew the whole thing because this is a side opening garment rather than a back opening garment, which is what we normally have. But we're going to sew this entire U-shaped curve from center back to center front. This month's video is so unhinged between Buddy and this crazy patchwork shorts overhaul I'm doing. Can't wait to hear everyone's feedback on it. Okay, so we are going to do this U-shaped seam now. Buddy needs a full-time professional petter, which is now Andrea's job. Now you can press this seam open. It gets a little tricky around the crotch curve. Honestly, doesn't need to be pressed open as much here, but you can get in there with a ham. So sometimes I will like trim down a crotch curve if it's a closer fitting pant, but in this style, it's fine to leave it the full seam allowance, and also it gives it a little more sturdiness, having a longer seam allowance. Okay, so that's your crotch seam sewn. You can see I did something a little crazy on these front pockets, but c'est la vie. All right, so we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're ready to sew our bodice to our pant. Now, one very important thing to note is that we are going to put them right sides together and pin and stitch as normal, except for the shirred back panel. Okay, and I'll explain that as I'm pinning. So we're gonna put the bodice right sides together with the pant. I'm gonna start with my side seams. And then we've got darts to match. Another important thing to note is that this edge is finished on the pant where we put the facing, but the bodice is not finished there yet. So we want this bodice seam allowance to extend 5/8 of an inch past the pant. All right, so I'm gonna pin that. All right, and now these darts match the pockets. Okay, so the reason for not sewing the shirred back panel is that it's a personal pet peeve of mine in vintage dresses that have shirring, like the old like Hawaiian dresses, Alfred Shaheen. So there would be shirring in the bodice to make it comfortable and adjustable to wear. But then they would sew it to the skirt or the shorts as usual. And so there would be no stretch in the waistline. So you have a nice flexible bodice that's comfortable to wear, but then a teeny tiny rigid waistline. So I feel strongly that there should also be stretch in the waist seam. So where the shirring is. So we're gonna pin at center back here. You have a notch to match your center back panels to, your panel to. So there's one. Okay, and then the other one is right here. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna stitch here to the shirred back panel. We're gonna leave this free, and you'll see the pant will be a lot bigger than the shirred panel, because in the next step, we're gonna stretch the two together and sew them with the elastic thread so that it will stretch just like the panel does. So for now, we are using our regular all-purpose thread, not elastic. We're starting at the center, no, not the center back. We're starting at the left side seam. And I'm stitching just until I get to the shirred back panel. So we have these seam allowances here. They need to stay pressed towards the side back panel. Okay, so now I'm gonna break my stitching. I'm gonna ignore all of this. I'm gonna go to the next seam line. I'm gonna make sure these seam allowances are pressed towards the other side back panel. And I'm gonna start up again and back stitch again. And now you'll just finish your waistline seam as usual. Okay, and remember, this is where we have that 5/8 of an inch overhang on the bodice. So just go to the edge, the finished edge of the pant right there, and then backstitch. Now we're going to press the seam allowances up towards the bodice. And you're going to need to clip into your seam allowances in one of the next steps. I'm not going to do it yet. So just where you stitched. Now you can finish these, you can trim them down if you like. The bodice is lined, so this will be a clean finish. So if you want to just trim them down, that's perfect. And leave them raw. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is this bit right here. So let's go back to the machine, and I'm going to switch out my bobbin. I'm going to put my elastic thread bobbin back in. Just pull up my thread like usual. Okay. And now you can pin this, you can pin that center front seam to the notch, but you don't really need to pin the whole thing because we're just going to be pulling it like this taut to stretch out the elastic shirring, and so the two pieces match. And because we're using elastic thread in the bobbin, this seam will now be elasticized. Okay, so I backstitched, stitching at 5/8, and I'm pulling these two layers together so that they match. Okay, that's my center back seam on the pant, and now I'll do the same thing on the other side. And you have to stretch them pretty far, so don't be alarmed if you're like really having to stretch them. Be very firm with them. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you can see that what this does is that now they'll be gathering on the pant back. So we did that instead of darts. Okay, now what I would recommend here is that you clip into your seam allowances, both of them, at those circles. You want to finish these seam allowances on the shirred panel as one and press them up. You also want to make sure to really steam the elastic side well here, just like we did with the shirred back panel, so that it really scrunches up. And you can try to press the seam allowance up. It might be more comfortable going down. So this is what it'll look like from the right side. Okay, so there is your finished waistline seam. Okay, so now we're ready to work on our button placket. I'm trying to remember what it was called. So it's this long rectangular piece. So the first thing we're going to do, you want to make sure that it's interfaced, and you'll notice there are notches here, here, and here. So you want to identify the side closest to the notches, the short end closest to the notches, and we are going to be stitching across that end. So I'm pinning it right sides together, and then we will be stitching down the long end as well. Wait, no, that's not right. We're just stitching the short end. Whew, okay, just up here. Okay, glad I double checked that. It's just this end. And now we can trim across this corner, trim the seam allowances down, and now we'll turn this right side out and just poke out that corner. And now we'll press this with the wrong sides together. All right, now grab your overalls, your crazy patchwork overalls, and you want to identify the back. And on the back, we're going to be focusing on the left side seam. So grab your button placket, and we're going to be putting it right sides together with the overalls like this, matching notches. So there's one notch to match here. This one matches the waistline seam. And as you can see, this should end shy of the seam line, the finished upper edge of the button placket. And now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch along the long edge. And now we'll be pressing those seam allowances towards the overalls like this. And that's what it's going to look like. And this is where your buttons will get sewn and your snaps. Okay, so now that we have sewn the button guard, we can now sew the left side seam. And a couple things I want to mention. So you'll see the button marks on the button placket. That's what we're calling it, button placket. The lower two are for snaps. And the reason for that is that when we were figuring out how we were going to sew this thing, we didn't want you all have to do buttonholes through your pockets, like that would really suck. So we're like, well, what if we just put a couple big snaps there? But then when I was wearing these at the photo shoot, both me and Susie found that we didn't need the snaps open. We just like open from here and we're able to get into the overalls. So at this point, I would say try on your overalls and see how much wiggle room you need to be able to get your hips in there. Because it's kind of a pain having snaps down here, and it can make this buckle a little bit and not lay as flatly as one might like. So what this is all to say is you can sew this seam all the way up to above the second from the last circle, and that will kind of help everything lay a bit flatter. So if that's possible, you should do that. And that's what I'm going to do now. But if it's not possible, you can put snaps on those two lower placement marks. All right, so we're going to put the seam right sides together. So on this side, we have the hip facing. On the left side front, we have the hip facing, and on this side, we have the button placket. Now, I'm gonna start from, remember I'm doing shorts, so starting from the lower edge of my shorts, I'm gonna pin the seam together. And now this is a little weird because you have to turn these seam allowances away so that you can expose the seam here. And now we're going to be sewing, so kind of turn these seam allowances up. And now we're going to be sewing like basically in this seam line here. So we're going to be stitching these layers together. This is one of these like easier to see it than explain it kind of things. So I'm going through the layers and I'm making sure that my placket and my facing seam lines are like right on top of each other. I mean, mind you, this is all going to be like kind of hidden, but this is your seam line, so I want it to look as nice as possible. Okay, so I am going to stitch mine all the way up to that second from the bottom snap mark. So then the first button will be here. So now we're just going to, keeping all the seam allowances folded towards the facing and the placket, we're going to stitch right along that seam line and then continue all the way down to the bottom of the pants. It's a lot of bulk to get in this Bernina. There we go. So I'm aligning my needle with this seam line right here. I'm making sure that all my seam allowances are facing this way so that I'm not, oh my, good Lord, everyone. All right. And now I'm just stitching along in this ditch right here. Okay, so now I'm to the bottom of the placket. Now just easy peasy sewing a seam. So now you can press the pant leg seam allowances open. I would check, oops, yeah, see? Check the right side to make sure you didn't catch your seam allowances in there like I did. All right, I'm gonna go back and fix that, obviously. But you should be seeing a nice clean seam line like this. You should not be seeing that, but you know, that's pretty obvious. All right, and then after I fix that, the final thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna stitch across the bottom here so that the placket and the hip facing are connected at the bottom. Okay, so let me fix my little boo-boo there, and then we'll be back to do the bodice lining. All right, so now we're getting ready to line the bodice. So you need to do a couple prep steps. Remember, we have this one single side back bodice lining piece. On this piece, you're going to fold in and press the seam allowances on the vertical edges and the waistline edge. That's the tinier one, okay? So this angled edge is the neckline. You don't want to fold that under. Oh, thank you, buddy. That's very helpful. Okay, and then, no, buddy. I need to move you. I'm so sorry. You're such a good cuddler. Okay. And then on this bigger lining unit piece, you are going to fold in the waistline and this edge, not the side seam edge, but the back, the side panel edge, the one that's attached. Okay. So the side that doesn't have the side panel attached yet, don't do anything, and don't do anything around the neckline. All right, there's a lot of threads here. Okay, so now we're ready to pin our neckline pieces, or our lining pieces, to the bodice neckline. Okay. All right, so first things first, you want to make sure that your straps are facing down. And now we're going to put these right sides together. And there's lots of notches and circles and stuff to match. I have no idea. These short alls are coming out a little crazy, obviously. They're either going to be the thing I hate the most that I've ever made, or I'm going to wear them all summer. It's going to be one or the other. You guys want to take bets in the comments? I think one pocket got turned wrong side out, so these pockets look different. That's really, really making me question all my life choices. All right, so we're gonna stitch this edge here. Oh, hi again, buddy. Down to the waistline. Yeah, no, you're gonna get a pin in the eye. Is this the most unhinged video we've ever made? Let us know in the comments. Send a message to Buddy in the comments. All right, here we go. Well, I was just talking to the vet, and hopefully by the time I make the next video, Buddy will be living in my house. He won't need to be quarantined anymore. He needs one more round of testing just to ensure he can commingle with my cats. So he will probably be in a house by the next video, which is clearly what Mr. Buddy needs. Okay, so let's do these separately. First, I'm gonna do this piece all the way around from this center back panel with a shirring. We're gonna pivot, neckline, pivot again, and then sew this side seam, the left front side opening. Okay, so I'm gonna fold these seam allowances out. And we're stitching at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now when you get to this pivot point, make sure that you're pivoting just at that circle and that you're not getting the strap caught in your stitching in a weird way. It needs to be able to move freely. Making sure my strap is not going to get caught in my stitching here. And now we will pivot and finish this left side opening. Down to the waist. So I'm going to leave these seam allowances pressed up, and that will give me the cleanest finish here. And then backstitch. Okay, so now I'm going to do the single piece here. Find that back panel that needs its neckline finished. And we are going to stitch it right sides together. Now, here I can see that my seam allowance is a little more than 5/8. When you go to stitch this neckline, which we're just going to stitch from the placket to the shirred panel, instead of, you know, blindly following 5/8 here, your stitching to end at the finished top of the shirred panel, right? Because it would be weird to have a corner here. And that's just, you know, excess seam allowance, or your shirring shrink down a little further, but it's best to go to that seam line. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to grade these seam allowances. So the lining should be the shorter one all the way around. The overalls themselves, it's the widest seam allowance. And then there may be seam allowances in between, like the facing, etc. So I'm going to do that off camera. You can also clip into any inner curves, and then we'll come back and talk about the next. Okay, so believe it or not, this is the last section because I just went ahead and graded, and then I understitched here. You kind of have to break your stitching pretty often because of the corners and the pivot points. Understitch here, here, and then this single back panel, side back panel. And then I pinned it all in place as I'm gonna hand stitch it. So anywhere that it's free, you're going to want to, your seam allowances are already turned in, but you're going to pin and then slip stitch. And then let's talk about the hem. So it's the same on the pants as for if you were doing shorts. You need a 5-inch hem allowance for this if you're going to be doing the rolled up cuff. So the way it works is that you turn up 3 inches first, and then you edge stitch just next to the seam allowance there. And then you're going to roll up 2 inches like that. And then you can hand stitch them at the side seams, or you can stitch in the ditch there to keep them rolled up. And mine has that faded mark. Cool make, do, and mend kind of situation. I don't know if it's cool, but it is a make, do, and mend situation. So I'm going to do that on both legs. And then finally we have buttonholes to make on the front left opening as marked. We have buttons to sew. And if you left this open past the pocket, you'll want to do 2 big snaps on the lower 2 markings. And then finally, you'll want to do 2 buttonholes at the end of each strap horizontally, so parallel with this short end. One there, one there. That'll make them adjustable, but of course try this on before you make any buttonholes. And then for the straps, you'll need a button on each side back panel on the inside. Okay, so a lot of finishing work to do there, but that's it. I know this pattern is a little bit complex. I was like, why, this should have been a charm pattern. But I think it's worth it. It's really fun. And I know this is something I'm gonna be wearing a lot of. And I promise I'll share the results of my crazy make, do, and mend short-alls with you as well. Okay, everyone, that is it, your make, do, and mend overalls. I hope you've loved this project. I hope you love this theme. I'm really excited to continue this month talking about World War II, 40s fashion, sustainability with you all. So make sure to come to the Crowdcast this month because I think it's going to be a really fun one. And as you make your overalls, please do share them with me on social media. You can use the hashtag #MakeDoAndMendOveralls. Okay, so thank you so much for being a patron, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.